Thank you very much. Good morning to you all. Start by very, let's say, general statement. Unfounded and abusive lawsuits. The SLAPP's phenomenon is an issue that has been particularly close to our hearts. The ability for journalists to report freely on any matter that are issues of public interest is not just important, but essential to any democratic society. As a lawyer, I understand the importance of having legitimate legal recourse to remedy and damages inflicted upon a person, but let me be clear, SLAPPs are anything but legitimate lawsuits. In these cases, claimants use their position of power to deter scrutiny. They aim to financially and emotionally drain their targets, forcing journalists to self-censor and providing a chilling effect on the reporting of abuses. Essentially, their one and only goal is to silence. This House voted with a very strong majority our position on rules to protect journalists, activists, academics, artists and researchers from legal actions intended to silence them. We also voted on a separate report on the threats to journalists and media around the world. I wish we did not have to do this, but I am proud of this Parliament's tenacity because it is thanks to this House, as you said, that we have a proposal for a SLAPP directive on the table. And this is why I'm particularly pleased to be here today together with my friend and colleague, Timo Volken, with whom I have had the pleasure of working with back in 2021 on our own initiative anti-SLAPP report. He put a lot of effort to get the Commission to act. He persisted on the grounds that journalists should be free to do their work. So this report from yesterday, the vote from yesterday, is for those of you who have felt pursued, financially and emotionally drained, and sometimes left alone. And this is also in memory of Daphne Caruana Galizia, who was targeted with more than 40 pending lawsuits against her when she was cruelly assassinated in October 2017, a despicable act that inspired the pan-European anti-SLAPP movement. Let me assure you of the European Parliament's and my own continued support on this issue. Thank you, Timo, and thanks to everyone involved in making the Daphne law happen, the shadow rapporteurs and all the administrators and advisors. I wish you good luck for your first trialogue today.
Thank you very much, President. Rapporteur, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, also from my side, a warm welcome. Thanks for being here today. Thank you very much to our President, to Roberta, for your kind words. And indeed, I'm very happy that we adopted yesterday this law with 498 votes in favor. This is a strong signal from the European Parliament towards the Council that we need to get this problem right. So we are experiencing a growing numbers of SLAPP lawsuits against journalists, human rights defenders and activists throughout the European Union. For me, it's important to underline that we are not addressing particular member states, but we are realizing that this is a problem everywhere in the European Union. So we have to act very fiercely together. And as the President already said, we started our journey working on that back in 2021, and it's good that we finally adopted the Parliament's position. The focus of our proposal is indeed to ensure that those engaging in public participation are better protected, and I think we indeed have very strong elements to increase the protection. First, we have securities, we have fast-tracked procedures for compensation of harm. We included an early dismissal in unfounded cases and a reverse burden of proof, and we are calling for a union and national public registries to show the dimension of the problem. So I'm being a lawyer myself. I didn't know about SLAPPs during my studies. It was only in my position as MEP that I learned about this problem. And I think this is part of the problem, that lawyers, practitioners are not aware of this problem. So what we are also asking for is for the creation of one-stop shops in member states. So that victims of SLAPP can turn to a single point where they get support, information, and also financial support. But in addition to that, we need awareness raising and training for practitioners. So let me come to an end. We want to stop unlawful lawsuits against journalists, activists, and human rights defenders because they are a misuse of our judicial systems. These SLAPP lawsuits are not done to win the case. They are started to silence journalists, and this is a threat to democracy. And this is why we as the European Parliament have a very strong position. And as Roberta rightly said, we are starting with trialogues today because we are aware of the urgency and we want to make it happen during this mandate. So I hope that we can finish negotiations later very quickly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rapporteur. Do we have questions in the room? If so, please state your name and the name of the media you represent and also whom your question is for. Any hands? Yes.
Good morning, Pietro Guastamacchi, ANSA News Agency. Part of the text is the institution of these, how is it translated in English, these offices in every capital in order to provide assistance, exactly. As far as I understand, those will be anyway run by the member state. So in case of those member states in which there are concerns over the way freedom of expression is managed, is the Commission or the Parliament or anyone going to have some sort of power of control over their action or anyway a review capacity? Thank you.
Your question is for?
ANSA News Agency. Both, as a matter of fact, yeah.
Well, I mean, I can give a general and then Timo can go into the details. I mean, for us, we start from the point of departure that the Council needs to send a strong message. Every minister sitting around that table who is going to be negotiating that text with us has to be able to, hand on heart, say that I did everything that I could to protect journalists and the press freedom in my country and in all countries of the European Union. This is not a new discussion, but also be reminded of the fact that when we have the annual rule of law review, when we have the justice scoreboard, this would be one of the things that are analysed. In other words, when you have within your judicial framework the obligation to protect a part of your society, in this case it would be a journalist, through the one-stop shop and making sure that they are not silenced simply because people think they are above the law, then that has to be taken care of also by the judicial framework of the member states.
So we are asking the member states to create these one-stop shops, but of course we cannot create them for the member states. So yes, it is the duty of the member states to create them, but it will be scrutinized, as the President already explained. And in addition, we want to see a network of these one-stop shops, which are connected through all European member states. So there would be a network, and if one-stop shop isn't able to help, victims of SLAPP lawsuits can also address one-stop shops in different member states. So they will get help.
Thank you very much. Any other question? Yes, please.
Malachi O'Doherty from the Belfast Telegraph in Northern Ireland. As you know, Northern Ireland is now outside of the European Union because of Brexit, and yet in a strange way half and half inside, semi-detached from the European Union. Does this new legislation offer any hope for several journalists that I'm aware of who are under pressure from SLAPP cases in Northern Ireland? This particularly addressed, I suppose, to both of you, really.
Well, this has been also one of the questions that we were asked in our first press conference, actually. What happens in the UK? Also because of the country that I know best. Some of the toughest lawsuits are filed within British courts. If you ask me personally, where I see a future United Kingdom, Northern Ireland and EU cooperation, it would include also in judicial cooperation. I would not close the door on anything. If we need each other on security, we need each other on trade, we will need each other on judicial cooperation, and we would need to find a framework for it. I cannot see the outcome of it yet, but I think after the conclusion of the Windsor framework, we can really look into where we can find common ground. And on this, also in the past, if I think about how influential the United Kingdom was as a member of the European Union on this, I remember cross-border judicial training, making sure that you have recognition of cases, both civil and criminal lawsuits, European arrest warrants. These are issues that the UK had been leading on. And that is one thing that I would say personally, I would hope that it would continue to be willing to be around the same table with us from going forward from here.
Just to add quickly, so of course the United Kingdom is also working on an anti-SLAPP law as far as we know. So legally it would be of course outside of the European Union jurisdiction. So yeah, it depends on what is done in the UK. We as the Parliament, we also address the problem of forum shopping, which Roberta was referring to. So when powerful individuals use provisions in different member states to sue their victims. And this is why we also called to address the Brussels I and Rome II convention, so that the slappers, the ones who abuse our judicial system, cannot choose and pick the most favorable jurisdiction for their lawsuit. And we asked this as well, so let's see what the discussions with the Council will bring on that matter.
Thank you. Next question. Yes, please.
Hello, I'm Peter Madrol from Slovakia, Daily Pravda. This sounds like a new problem for me because I haven't heard about many SLAPP lawsuits in Eastern Europe. So I want to ask you which member states have the most uses of SLAPP lawsuits? And it's a question for Ms. Metzel, I think.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that you say it's a new issue because, as Tim also said earlier, you know, when we studied law, we did not discuss this when we studied media law, for example. When we never thought that this would be the flip side of politicians, business people, highly, let's say, financed individuals that find it easy for their name not to be shown or for journalists not to investigate them if they file lawsuits against them. When we were doing the research originally, we spoke to European associations of journalists, and we were surprised, frankly, by cases from every member state. I can't specifically remember one from yours, we would have to check, but what was clear also and surprising to me is that this was not only a north, south, east, west issue, it was everywhere, because you have people, particularly those who want to forum shop, who would like to use, I mean, in cases that I'm familiar with, also the US, in order to file cases where it is easiest in order for you to find a judge that is willing to take on such a case. And you also lead me to a point where we realize that also not only are lawyers not trained, but also our judges are not trained. In other words, when faced with an application to protect or to freeze the assets, for example, of a journalist, this is new area of jurisprudence. And this case, this report, and the research that was conducted by the European Commission actually in preparation of their proposal, and we have gone further and will definitely push for the Council to come closer to us because their text has been quite diluted, if I may say so, is precisely because I think everybody would understand that their judges and their legal experts need to be better familiar with the reality that is growing everywhere.
Thank you. Next question. Yes, please.
Yes, hello. I'm Gulyás Balázs from Hungary, Gulyás Agyumedia and Media One. And it's the question to the rapporteur. Did you think about what this legislation will mean in Hungary, where they tried to use all of the European legislation from the other side? And if they adopt it into the Hungarian legislation, I think there is a chance that they will use it in the benefit of their of the government, of the power in Hungary. And all of us know what is happening right now in Hungary and how they are acting in the European Union. So my question is, did you think about it? Did you think about the effects it will cause in Hungary if they adopt it? Thank you.
So, of course, when we drafted the law, we were, first of all, analyzing the situation in different member states. And it is true that in some member states, the freedom of press is under great danger. But SLAPP cases are happening everywhere. This is very important to underline. So we are introducing a set of rules which will make it easier for a victim of a SLAPP to claim that this is a SLAPP case, and the judge can then dismiss the case more quickly. So we have been discussing with judges and lawyers very intensively if there could be loopholes so that what we intend as a support for journalists can be turned around. So far, we received the feedback that we are not creating dangerous loopholes. So I'm very confident that in the end, these applicable laws will really help the ones who are victims of SLAPP cases. We have one issue with the question of the scope. So far, our rules would, of course, only cover cases where we have a cross-border effect. So what we as the Parliament are aiming for is to extend the scope of cross-border to cover as many cases as possible. And yes, there may be cases which are solely national ones. So in a case where a journalist is sued by, for example, the government from the same member state reporting about an issue from the same member state, there is no European links. So this, our legislation wouldn't affect or wouldn't cover this case. But what we are doing is to ask the member states to transpose the rules for cross-border cases also for national cases. But unfortunately, there is no legal grounds for us to ask them, to force them to do that. But a lot of member states already indicated that they would also apply the rules for cross-border cases for their national cases.
Thank you very much, Rapporteur. Next question. Yes, please.
Yeah, hello, Lucia Sikorová from Lídací pes Czech Republic. So first of all, thank you very much to the European Parliament for accepting this very important law. And I can only confirm that this is really very important even for local level, where it already silenced critical journalism, this problem. So my question would be, will there be any guidelines? You mentioned the training of lawyers and judges, first of all. So would that be unified in any way, or how do you want to ensure? How would you like to look into this as well, so that this really happens in the right way? Because this is definitely one of the biggest worries or problems. How this will happen?
Well, I remember. I mean, this has been ever since. I remember in the post-2004 enlargement. So when your country joined the European Union, how would we, after having adopted the acquis, make sure that we implement it properly? And especially in civil law, where national systems are very different, where some countries have a completely different type of legal framework. And there had been the creation of judicial training, which is done at a European level, where judges are invited. Each country has an association of judges and magistrates. The Court of Justice had been involved then as well, because this was in the context of the possibility of making preliminary references to the European Court in order to interpret specific provisions at the time of civil law regulations, such as maintenance, recognition, mutual recognition of decisions. So my expectation would be that that training would extend to this as well. The systems are in place. Some countries are better than others. In some countries, it is in the interest for that not to happen. But there is funding at the European level for this, and there are training academies that are funded by EU funds in order for national judges to be trained on this.
Yeah, there's, if I may add, for example, the PADFOX project, which is indeed financed by the European Union and already helps practitioners to understand SLAPP cases. And we have in our text now, which was adopted yesterday, provisions on the training of legal practitioners. And we will, of course, discuss it with the member states. In the end, the member states have to implement it. That's the reality. But we will try to make sure that they really implement it and make sure that their legal practitioners are trained on this matter, which is desperately needed.
Thank you, Rapporteur. Next question, if there is any. Yes, please.
Hello, from Cyprus News Agency. I was actually wondering if this legislation would apply in cases that a journalist is based outside of the EU and is reporting or creating a piece about the EU. So would they be able to assist if there was a lawsuit against him in that case?
Well, I mean, perhaps a legalistic answer. I mean, if it depends on where the court case is instituted, I would say. In other words, if the court case is instituted in a court of the European Union, then this law would apply, no matter where the location of the journalist is or the nationality. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Next question. Yes, please.
Hi, Marko Nemeth from Slovakia, from Started Up Outlet. I'd like to ask a rather specific question. Do we know any specific numbers for these SLAPP causes, or like also about the training of these lawyers and judges, just like you mentioned? Do we know about specific how many of them are right now? Thank you very much.
I have to find the numbers.
So it's thousands, but we don't have an exact number as there is no clear methodology. But we are we are asking for to change it in our Parliament's position. We are asking to create a register to collect the cases so that we have a complete overview. But of course, it depends a bit on how you define it. So there is a bit of uncertainty in the numbers, but I would say that every SLAPP case is one SLAPP case too much, so we have to take action. But there are in all member states cases even where you don't expect them. And so there are very many, unfortunately, and we will come up with a framework to get the numbers and then have to have also reporting on the numbers.
And to complement on this, I mean, to be clear, this law will not be able to save all journalists. I mean, not even 100 laws would, as Daphne's family said. But the one problem we've had, and we've realized, and this is linked to the difference between the Parliament and the Council on whether domestic cases are covered, is that in some cases in some countries you have anti-SLAPP legislation, in some countries you have none. In some countries you have draft anti-SLAPP legislation, in some countries there is a very high resistance to introducing them. And SLAPP would fall also overlap with whether we talk about libel, we talk about criminal libel, defamation, freezing of assets, threats, which would then fall under criminal law. So this is also why we have asked and worked on an overarching definition of what it means in order to protect a specific sector of our society that is investigating truth and justice. And that's is trying to be silenced by specific other parts of societies.
Thank you. We have time for last question. Yes, please.
This is Francesca De Benedetti from Domani newspaper. I'm wondering which kind of leverages you expect to use during the trilogue, given that sometimes, at least, the governments are the main enemies of journalists. I can witness it, given that my newspaper, Domani, was attacked with a slap by the Prime Minister Meloni herself. So how can you counterbalance the power of governments in influencing the end of the trilogues themselves? Thanks.
Yeah, indeed. So the Parliament's position and the Council position are, I would say, not very close. So it starts with the definitions where we are going further than what the Commission introduced. We are extending the scope by extending the definition of abusive cases. And we are also extending, and what I already mentioned, matters of cross-border. And this is very important to cover as many files, as many cases as possible. So there we have a complete disagreement with the Council. For example, we are introducing the assistance to SLAPP victims, which we mentioned, the one-stop shops, the financial, the psychological support. We are creating this new article on the registries to get an impression of the cases happening right now in the European Union, and so on. So there are differences. Of course, I'll not communicate my red lines here because this would not be very helpful for the upcoming trialogue today, and I'll have to discuss this with the shadow rapporteurs. But for us, and this is what we discussed in advance, and I think what you can take from the Parliament's position, is the most important thing is to protect as many journalists in the best way possible, and we will do everything what is needed to come to this outcome. And I really hope that we can convince the Council to be a bit more progressive, because the journalism, freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of information is at the core of our democracy. And you mentioned governments which are threatening journalists with SLAPP cases, but they are not in the majority. So I really hope that we can move on and convince them that the Parliament's position is a good direction.
Perhaps a last comment from my end, if I can. We have over 170 open files to close until the end of the mandate. And we have already closed a huge amount of them. And I can tell you that when you have a strong negotiator, such as Timo, with such a strong mandate from the Parliament, if you can team that up, even our appeal to you with associations of journalists that put the pressure on the individual governments, I think we can manage. It is not abnormal that the positions of the Parliament is always quite progressive in this area, and we should be proud of that. We are the leaders in this area, and there's so many others, and that means that we will have to find an agreement, and this is an agreement with majority and not by consensus in the Council.